So basically, me too. Any questions? Happy to be here. We're really, in this country and in many metropolitan areas across the country, at a turning point in our demographic and economic challenges. And I'm going to show you some numbers here that I have double-checked and triple-checked because even I am astounded by some of these numbers, and they should help inform how we go from here on out. I'll talk about national development trends and national demographic trends. I'll also talk about Kansas City metropolitan trends, and I'll mention in addition some preferences that I've found for the greater Kansas City metropolitan area that can help shape the discussions here. The first thing, of course, is that the housing market has changed fundamentally in the financing arena. The subprime mortgages that got us into trouble are gone, thankfully. Actually, I've got to tell you that when we lived in Alexandria, Virginia, in 2005, I was working at Virginia Tech then. In 2005, our cat, Valentine Nelson, got a note in the mail offering her $500,000 in a 3% mortgage. And all she had to do, because she was pre-qualified, was to sign on the bottom line and send it in, and you get a pre-qualification coupon to go buy a home. Well, she didn't buy the house in 2005. That was the peak of America's home ownership rate, and it's been a collapse ever since, just because she didn't sign that paper, I guess. We're now looking at 20% down payments as becoming the new normal, back to the new normal for home purchasing. This is actually embedded in new rules, federal rules. I think they are still under review. But a lot of mortgage underwriters are basically anticipating a 20% down payment as a matter of course. Well, about 1/3 of Americans who live in their homes own their homes free and clear. But of the 2/3 that live in their homes with a mortgage, 2/3 of them put less than 20% down. So if we're reverting back to the 60s and 50s and 70s, so 20% down payment is standard, do the numbers on what that means for home ownership rates. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are in the chopping blocks, basically. A lot of Republicans want to get rid of them, and even Obama wants to change them significantly. So I'm thinking that we're looking at a future around the country, and probably in the metropolitan Kansas City area as well. Smaller homes, maybe more people per home, smaller lots, maybe more attached units, and maybe more renters, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes. So I want to spend a couple minutes on a very complex chart, because I think this tells volumes about where we were, how we got here, and where we're going, and implications for Kansas City. Now, the Kansas City metropolitan area tracks very nicely with national trends. So I'm trying to show you national numbers, but these are very close to the kinds of trends you had in the past and that you're going to have towards the future. So I divide crudely, and apologies to RC Elko because they do a much better job of this than I do, but I divide the world crudely into starter households, those who are buying the small homes, small lots, renting condos, townhouses, the people over 65 who are downsizing, empty nesting, they've raised their families, and then the vast middle between 35 and 64. These are the households with growing families, adding people. We want more and more space. We have the income. It's what I would call the triple storm. We have the motive, the need for space, the means, the income, and the opportunity, because developers gave us a very good product for the price. Well, between 1990, and I'll use two comparable 20-year periods, 1990 to 2010, 2010 to 2030. So in the period 1990 to 2010, there was no net increase in the starter home demand. It actually decreased. It decreased by 2 million households. Among the downsizing households, we saw an increase of 17% of the total number of households over 65 in this period. But look here, 83% of the entire demand for new housing in this country was to serve the needs of the households in their peak home consumption period of life, between 35 and 64. Now, look also at these numbers from the American Housing Association, roughly comparable years, 89 to 90, this should be actually 2009, my apologies. So comparable 20-year period. Over this 20-year period, we saw 25 million homes built, all homes, apartments, condos, townhouses, 21 million detached. So basically, detached homes accounted for 85% of all the construction to meet the needs of the 83% of the new households being formed that needed space to live in. 6.6 million, almost 7 million homes are over 2,500 square feet. About a third of all detached homes built were over 2,500 square feet. Again, to meet the space needs of this household group here. And 42% of all new detached homes built between 1990 and 2010, or 89 and 2009, were 1/2 acre to 10 acres. 42% of all new single-family detached units were on a 1/2 acre to 10 acre lot. That was then. Look what's going to happen in the next 20 years. Starter homes, starter households will comprise 10% of the net change in housing demand. So therefore, we need to have new condos and new apartments and smaller homes to meet that demand. The peak housing consumption cohort is only going to be adding 16% in demand to the nation's housing supply between 2010 and 2030. 16% down from 83%. 74% of the net change in housing demand will be from the downsizing empty nesting households. We're just at the beginning of this. And remember, beginning 2011, last year, and going to 2029, the baby boomers all turn 65. All of them. So we're looking at a vastly different housing demand situation in the future, I'm pretty sure. So here's a chart showing the number of seniors living between 1970, 2040. 1970, we had about 20 million people over 65. By 2040, we'll have about 80 million people over 65. But look, this is when the baby boomers all start turning 65. They were born between 1946 and 1964, and they will turn 65 between 2011 and 2029. And I do a lot of publishing and research. So I've got a paper coming out doing some research that we did at the university, and what we found was that when you turn 65, you don't die. But even more importantly, when you turn 65 in this country, you can expect to probably live to be nearly 90. We've added 10 years of longevity onto the lifespan of people turning 65 between 1950, actually 1960, and 2010. So more of us are going to be turning 65, and we're going to be living a lot longer than ever before. And when we turn 65 and we're empty nesting and downsizing, what about our home buying proclivities? This chart was prepared by Dal Myers and his doctoral student in Southern California. Dal Myers is probably one of the most preeminent demographers in the world in housing. So what he found was the propensity for households in 5-year age groups to buy homes rises dramatically as they form their households and they need space. Then it begins to fall off fairly steadily out to their 80s and beyond. The propensity to sell homes rises also as in the early years as people are buying and selling and moving up, stabilizes. But look, in the late 60s, say around 70, the lines cross. Beyond 70, people are unloading their homes and not buying homes. The baby boomers start turning 70 in 2016. So beginning about mid-decade, in this decade, and going for the next 20 to 25 years, we're going to be seeing 1 million senior households attempting to sell their homes each year. That's what this is telling me. And oh, by the way, when a senior, yes, sir.
A question for you. How do you, or did you factor in existing housing? Because it seems to me that the X hits and grows. Well, one group is wanting to get out, another group is wanting to get in. But those were new builds, right?
I'm sorry?
Your last chart was new builds?
No.
That one
The
right
track
there.
that we're on.
Oh, I'm sorry.
This
No.
No, go back. I'm sorry.
This house, this one?
Oh, one more.
One more.
Okay.
Okay,
This is new builds.
right.
Okay. Not existing stock.
Correct.
For the whole thing or just the bottom?
This is the newly built homes during the 20-year period.
But the top is the whole market, or is it all?
This is the whole market, yeah.
That-
This is
there's the whole
this is the change in the share of market for the 20-year periods.
For
And this is
new
the,
build.
new- and this is the new homes built.
Right, not for existing.
Correct.
Okay. So when I look at that, it says to me that the boomers only want new homes. Is that what that's supposed to say?
No, I can see where you make that connection, and I need to maybe think of a way to refine it. It's not necessarily that boomers all want the brand new home.
Right.
They'll move into an existing home. As they move out, somebody else will follow them.
Right. So it seems to me they want the starter home now.
Right.
And that's why I'm saying if the existing stock is being abandoned by those that want to move up,
Mhm.
it seems that those that want to downsize will fill back in to the starter home.
These are the people who will move up to
Yeah.
the homes. Look at their share
Yeah.
compared to that share
A new build.
of new build. We can do the housing supply easily enough, and I've done it in the back of the envelope. My chief concern is, well, let's talk about my chief concern is in many metropolitan areas, not so much the case here, because you are growing here. You're not booming, but you're not stagnating. You're growing about national average.
Okay.
But in a third of the metropolitan areas, as the boomers try to unload their homes, there's nobody behind them to buy their homes.
At current price.
Well, conceivably at
I
any
can see
price.
some real deals coming on.
Yeah,
Which
yeah,
might impact the new build.
exactly. Yeah, these are very good points. That won't happen so much in much of the metropolitan Kansas City area. You might see it in the fringes, but you'll see this in Memphis. You'll see this in St. Louis. You'll see this in the outskirts of Chicago, Milwaukee, through the Great Lakes. And actually, in some of those situations, in the upper tier of New York State and parts of Pennsylvania, my biggest concern, frankly, is that there's not going to be a buyer for these homes at any price. And so the seniors, we have this thing called aging in place, how romantic it might be. But to me, aging in place has two pieces. You can age in place voluntarily, that's nice and wonderful, or you can age in place involuntarily because there's nobody to back up your home. And a lot of these people in the upper Midwest areas, the Great Lakes areas, are going to eventually figure out that they can't unload their home, they'll just leave it.
Yeah, Detroit.
You know the places. So, sorry.
Couple quick questions, so I want to make sure I understand
Yeah.
these charts. I think it's powerful. So I understand the bottom half, the numbers are units built, that's new construction. That's the supply side.
Right.
The top half, which is demand side, is that only for new construction or is that the entire market? I think that's what Kurt asked, but I wasn't sure I heard the answer.
Yeah, this is the entire market
That's-
shares. This is the entire market shares of new demand.
New demand, but not
New demand.
As I turned 65 at mid-decade, I move into this group, but I'm a piece of the growth, but I'm not the total.
The top half is the demand in the market, the bottom half is what we're building.
The top half is the shift in the share
Yes.
of demand.
For new housing units.
Well, actually.
Or the total market.
For new, you're right.
New.
Well, that's
For
what I'm
new,
trying to get.
net new demand.
Net new.
Right.
But not just for new house, new units.
No, only for new houses.
Well, it's net new housing demand, and you can say, does that mean new housing units? You could take an existing housing unit and cut it in two,
Right.
like an accessory dwelling unit.
Well, let me tell you why I think this is important for
Yeah,
me.
right, you could be,
If I'm in
So it's
development,
demand for housing.
and I see all this new growth, that means growth in revenues.
Not for new construction.
But if really that's not the real growth, then in other words, it's not going to be new construction, but only a reshuffle of the existing from a different demand source, then I'm going to have an increase in income.
it's market share. So
You will have some increase in income. This is the distribution of the share of
this is
increase
gonna build 100.
in new housing
The
demand.
first one, 83.
Okay. So below that, let's say you're 74%.
Percent of that 174.
If I were to look at the total market available, that 74% can go to 10,
I'm sorry, let me go to.
10% of the total market, including existing homes.
So we will have to build, and forgive me if I don't have the precise number,
No.
something in the order of 25 million new homes, no, let's see, 30 million new homes between 2010 and 2030. 30 million new homes.
But there'll be exponentially
But
more.
three-quarters of that new demand may be to meet these people. These people will try to unload their larger homes and buy the townhouses or the smaller lots.
One more question. Is there a significant difference between starter and downsizing, or is that basically the same type of housing?
It's the same. It's the same. You know, you move up, you move down. In my own personal experience, you know, like a lot of us, we started with apartments and maybe smaller homes, and I now live in a very nice home, thank you very much, but I'm already anticipating moving to a smaller condo or townhouse. Move up, move down. Yeah. But what strikes me is that the starter home demand has been very small over the past 20, actually, it'll still be small over a 40-year period for that age group. But that'll be made up by the seniors moving in. So I wanted to talk about this for a second too. Seniors own their homes at the largest rate of any age group in the country. 80% of seniors own their homes. So what I try to look at is what kind of home does a senior move into when they move? So it turns out that before they make a move, 20% of seniors rent. But when they make their move, they make a really big move. Nearly 60% when they move end up renting. Now I'm ignoring the nursing home group because they don't technically, that's a whole different kind of market. But we're looking at the apartments or independent living options and so forth. Now, this is a big swing. Thankfully, the seniors also are very stable. They only move at the rate of about 3% per year. The rest of us move about 6 to 8% per year in a normal year. So seniors move at a very slow rate, but over a 30-year period, you're looking at a very high rate of change among seniors. My guess is starting 2015, going to about 2040, we're going to be seeing a large shift in demand, probably to innovative rental options. Another trend that's happening are little things like gasoline prices. This chart shows the gasoline non-adjusted. This is the nominal gasoline prices from 2002 to 2012, September 2012, by the U.S. Energy Information Administration. I ran a regression line through this, came up with an R-square of 70, which is pretty good for just two data points. T. Roche's work are good at everything else. This is basically a kind of a trend line. And if you run the numbers out, that means by 2020 we're looking at $8 per gallon gasoline, and 2030, $15 a gallon of gasoline. But what strikes me is that fairly consistently, except for the recession, but knock the recession out, fairly consistently, we're seeing, on average, 10% per year compounded increase in gasoline prices. Now, I do a lot of consulting with developers around the country. I also research the area. For the first time in my nearly 40 years in this business, I'm now seeing prospective home buyers internalizing the expectation of ever increasing gasoline prices in their location decision-making process. They never did that. Well, maybe once in 1974 with the first oil embargo, but that was it. Now it's a mass internalization of this expectation, and that's going to shift where people end up choosing to live. Now let's drill these numbers down to the Kansas City metropolitan area. I'll highlight a few trends, and we have a report that we're finalizing that will be available through Mark on this. So, in terms of the change in the ethnicity and race of the population, between 2010 and 2040, the white non-Hispanic population will be about 19% of the total share of change over this 30 years, and the minority population will be about 81% of the total share of change. And so the composition, and you're very comparable to all kinds of metropolitan areas in the country, so we're looking at a vastly changing demographic composition in this country. I talked about aging. About a third of the net change in population between now and 2040 will be people over 65 in the Kansas City metropolitan area. Households with children. Now, between 2010 and 2040, about 13% of the net change or growth in households will have children in them. We'll have more children in 2040 than now, more households with children in 2040 than now, but their share of the total number of households change is 13%, which means 87% of the net change in all households in this metropolitan area will not have children in them because they've already been raised, haven't yet been raised, or in some cases may never be raised. 87%. 54% of the net change in total households between 2010 and 2040 will be single-person households, mostly as baby boomers lose their partners. So I worry about our planning and zoning and other institutions as we think about the future. Do we think about the future as though it was the past? And are we assuming that half of the next new demand for all new housing will be large homes in the suburbs, when we see this number is going to be upon us starting this year, basically? So we need to think ahead about anticipating the next generation or two even of housing demand. Now notice households by age. Under 35 would be that starter household that I talked about earlier, between 35 and 64, households in their peak demand, and then households over 65 are empty nesting, downsizing, and so forth. Notice that for the Kansas City metropolitan area, the peak demand households will only add 8% to the total change in new housing demand between 2010 and 2040. And the other groups, the older, the seniors will be more than half, the starter homes will be 36%. These combined, the small unit, basically groups combined, are 92% of the net change in demand for new homes over this 30-year period. 10-year change, sorry.
So, if I work with Tim, that is the net change. Less than one is going to be 35 to 64.
Fewer than 1 in 10 new homes.
Yeah, 8%.
Yeah, 8%.
So
you'll have a net increase in total supply,
but of the change.
but they're only going to be 8% on top of the current.
Okay.
I mean, essentially, the growth in the market for what we're new building is flat for the next 20 years.
Right.
There will be no substantial growth in the number of people demanding the kinds of homes we've been building for the
That's
last.
the point,
That's right.
yeah. You'll have some, but it's not going to be,
It's very modest.
Yeah.
8% over 20 years.
right, right. Yeah, thank you, that's well put. Now, if we, home ownership rates vary by race and ethnicity. If we're looking at the racial and ethnic change that's going to be occurring in the Kansas City metropolitan area between now and 2040, we'll be looking at more households that are going to be less able to buy homes unless we knock housing prices down. It's a possibility. And also if we adjust the mortgage underwriting regulations to remove the 20% impending requirement. But when I just look at the numbers based on 2010 home ownership rates by racial group and ethnicity, and I roll those forward to 2040 and look at the net changes in shares of demand, what I find is that roughly half of the net change in housing development between 2010 and 2040 will need to be for renters and half for owners. Now, your home ownership rate is 67% now, or in 2010. It will fall to about 64.5%. It'll still be about 60%. But in terms of factoring out the net change, I'm seeing a 50-50 split between owner and renter demand. Now, I do not believe for a minute that half of all new units built will be for rental households. What's going to happen is that many thousands of existing owner-occupied homes will flip to renters, and many other thousands, either legally or illegally, will become accessory dwelling unit options for family, for friends, for others, to meet their housing needs. So I've got a whole other lecture on the need to anticipate and plan for and allow accessory dwelling units as a way to meet a part of our future housing needs, but I don't have the time here today to do that. Like RCLCO, I used the same survey, National Association of Realtors, but I used that survey a little differently than they did to sort of look at the demand for support for things like mixed-use walkable communities. Actually, this is from another survey. I'm sorry about that. We got a survey from Porter and Novelli, done in the mid-2000s. It's a very large survey, 10,000 households versus 2,000 for the NAR survey. And it included one question that we used, and that was the support for walkable communities and the willingness or desire to live in walkable communities. Well, through most of the demographic cohorts, roughly half of all the people in the 4-state area here, I think the number of cases I needed to do this right, the 4 states, about half would support mixed-use walkable communities. You know, they wouldn't oppose them in planning commission hearings. And a little less than half would want to actually live in one of these things. But there's variation. Younger populations tend to want to live in these more. Older populations don't know what they mean, don't know what they are. You know, basically show me first before I dive into one of these. Variations somewhat in income, large variations by household type, whether you're single or with or without children. Now going to the going to the National Association of Realtors survey, actually just reiterating what RCLCO presented, the community A, the conventional community, or community B, the smart growth community, comparing the US figures to the 4-state figures, we see roughly comparable preferences. Trading off housing attributes. Again, I show the US averages for many of the indicators that RCLCO presented, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. Again, roughly, though, fairly consistent 4-state responses relative to the US. I want to talk for the next 2 or 3 minutes about where do we go from here. This is actually your future. embrace it.
I think we're-
And you're not alone. Atlanta, Dallas, Salt Lake City, where I'm living now, Washington DC, Bethesda, every place has these dead or dying retail, commercial places. They've gone their useful lives, but these are wonderful opportunities for redevelopment if we can get ahead of the curve. In my view, that these things are large pieces of land that are well drained, and they probably didn't used to be, but they're well drained now because they're so flat and asphalt covered. These places are sitting along 4 to 8 lane highways, so it's very easy to access them. It's very easy to dig up the old infrastructure and replace it because you're not dealing with all of the neighborhood easement issues. These highways are basically transit ready, as you already know from your current work. And the nice thing is that, this is already committed to something other than single-family residential subdivisions. And finally, there's a neighborhood back here. You don't see it for the trees, but they are not pleased that their backyards are up against a dead mall or a dead center. So we can turn what might be NIMBYs, not in my backyards, into YIMBYs, yes in my backyard, fix this thing for me so I can have increased property values. Now the reason why these become such opportunities for us is that once we build these structures, they don't last very long, and they're not supposed to last very long. They're supposed to last as long as the investment portfolio allows it. So here we have a chart based on federal statistics showing the average useful life of major types of non-residential structures compared to residential structures. Talk about this for a second first. Believe it or not, and I didn't believe it until I ran the numbers over and over again, the typical useful life of a residential structure of all kinds built after 1940 is 170 years. Now, those structures aren't 170 years yet. So I do the attrition analysis and estimate the longevity. Some people at Southern California took my numbers and said, well, you can't be right. That can't be right. I used numbers from the Census, Department of Energy, and another service, and they checked me, and their result was 200 years. They thought it was going to go down, it went up. And then somebody in Washington, D.C., no, actually Cambridge, Massachusetts, ran his numbers using my number base, and he says it's going to be 500 years. The point is, no matter how long these things are, when you approve a residential development from a planning perspective, you take that site off the table for a long time, for centuries, in terms of redeveloping. So you need to consider, to approve these residential projects very carefully, because once you've done them, you've fixed that landscape for a long time. But on the flip side, you have wonderful opportunities with the other structures. The retail structures have a 20-year useful life. Low-rise offices, 55, 60 years. Warehouses, 25 years. The typical average non-residential structure will basically run 45 years in useful life. But that's only accounting for normal depreciation. If we consider the land value change over time, on top of the depreciating value of the building, we actually accelerate the time when these non-residential structures can become ripe for redevelopment to some other, hopefully higher and better use. So let's take a 50-year structure, and in the first year, maybe 80% of the entire value of the property is the structure itself, and 20% is the land. But in the Kansas City metropolitan area, you're looking at, pretty good growth. You're looking probably at 1 to 2% per year compounded increase in land value in most of your closer in urbanized areas. So we see that as land value increases over time and the building value depreciates over time, at the 33rd year, on a 50-year structure, in the 33rd year, suddenly the land becomes more valuable than the building. So somewhere around here, the building owner is saying, maybe I should think about doing something different with my property, because I don't really want to have land becoming more valuable than the building itself. That's an indicator of declining revenues and poor investment strategies. And this is a representation of what happens. This is in Athens, Georgia. This is a dead warehouse, and this is a dying commercial area. So what we have done at the University of Utah is come up with a routine where we take the assessor records and we calculate the 5-year period. The darker it is, the more distant in the future it is. We estimate the 5-year period where every single non-residential parcel in the Salt Lake County area, we've done this for other cities as well, become opportunities for redevelopment because the land value will become more than the structure value itself. But from a planning perspective, you might look, oh, this cluster here, all of these non-residential parcels kind of become opportunities for redevelopment at the same time, roughly the same 5 or so year period. Maybe we should get together with the property owners now and think through how we can help them and how they can help us address new and emerging and different market needs. So with this in mind, this is my last chart, I think. I've done a back-of-the-envelope analysis for the Kansas City metropolitan area. I've also done it for other parts of the country, including the nation as a whole. Basically, between the new space you have to build for new jobs and replacing the space that's going to be demolished because of aging, and that number is here. Oops, this is not showing up right. Okay, I estimate that in 2010, about 634 million square feet of non-residential space of all kinds existed in the KC metropolitan area. I estimate that between 2010 and 2040, 694 million square feet will have to be replaced. That means that many buildings will be replaced twice. The 20-year buildings will be replaced twice. So when you add total new space needed for new jobs, plus all the replaced space being that's going to be online, we're looking at about 950 million square feet of total new non-residential construction in the KC metropolitan area. That's about that's about $1 trillion actually. That's 1.5 times more than the non-residential space that existed in 2010. This is an opportunity because for the most part, your non-residential spaces are on a 0.2 FAR, floor area ratio, meaning that 80% of the property is basically open in some fashion, and that becomes great opportunities for infill redevelopment, especially along your transit lines. So the review that I have here is that the markets are changing faster than we probably anticipate, maybe even want to. Rental housing demand will be very important to try to anticipate and accommodate. Like RCLCO, up to 1/3 of all the households want like walkable communities, not everybody, but the 1/3 that want those opportunities don't have them now. And so actually in 2040, to meet the demand for the 1/3 of the households that want walkable communities, all new construction will have to be in walkable community opportunities. So with that, thank you all very much.